Welcome to another episode of Wits and Weights. Today I have a very special guest, Eric DeGatti, and we're going to talk about training. Eric has spent over 20 years in the fitness industry as a coach, trainer, and instructor. Each year he travels around the world teaching and speaking to trainers, coaches, and therapists as a lead instructor for functional movement systems and guest speaker for prestigious organizations, including the Navy SEALs, the Mayo Clinic, and multiple major universities. Eric also appeared in the New York Times bestseller, The 4-Hour Body by Tim Ferriss. His list of training clients includes an Olympic gold medalists, All-Americans, national champions, World Series champions, and Pro Bowl athletes. Eric's latest projects include Diamond Revolution Training, an online training platform for baseball and softball athletes, and the Principles of Program Design, an educational workshop series and coaching service for trainers and clinicians on the art and science of designing training programs. He also has a really cool podcast that I've been listening to lately. And Eric, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining me to talk training.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for being a listener. And we can't wait to get you on there at some point.
Yeah, likewise. I love talking this, can talk about it all day. And I want to start by digging into your background as a coach and trainer, specifically around programming. But I do want to get into performance and injury prevention a little bit later. Tell us about your background and I guess your unique approach to training and programming.
Okay, so the background is that I was always fascinated, but the impact of training and what it can have, and so the kind of to go all the way back, I had a situation where I was always, depending on how loosely use the term, always an athlete growing up. Always loved playing baseball and football were my two main sports, but you get to a point at 5'6" where you realize those who can't do must teach. And so how can I get into sports and do something? So I kind of always had that in the back of my mind. At the same time, I was in my early 20s, late teens, and I had some really bad back issues. Don't know why. And was sleeping on the floor for about 4 months or so. And my mother, because I was just stubborn and stupid. And my mother said, look, you got to go get this checked out. You're not going to live your life like this. You're too young. So I went to my general practitioner. I didn't know any better. Wait in the office for 2 hours to go sit on, the paper for another hour. And then finally have him look at my back. I always joke, he looked at my back like I would look if you opened up the hood of my truck. Like, I have no idea what I'm even looking for unless like there's an extension cord unplugged, sure. Right? So he looked at my back like that and said, oh, it could be anything. And I said, really? I just waited 3 hours for you to tell me it could be anything. So I got frustrated and I said, you know what? I'm just going to go to the gym. I'm just going to look at every machine or exercise that says back. And I don't care what it does or how it does. I'm just going to try them all. And I started doing it. And by shit luck, my back started feeling better. So it got me into investing time in the gym. And I said, you know what? If I'm going to invest this time, I want to at least know I'm doing it right. Started learning more and more and said, you know what? Let me give this a shot. And so went and started off with getting every certification that there was. And back in the, mid to late 90s, if you sent me a brochure, a pamphlet in the mail for, hey, we got a certification, you got a sucker, because I would buy it. So I did every certification there was, and then lucked out and met some cool people along the way. I was able to do 2 levels of Paul Chek's internship with him. I did 2 levels of Charles Poliquin's internship. And then I also got the unique ability to meet both Lee Burton and Gray Cook when they were in the real early stages of FMS, before it was even really a course. And so, when they had their first, one of their first live certification courses, I brought my whole staff there, and then kind of got hooked in and kept bugging them. And they said, you know what, you kind of know this stuff. Why don't you come help us teach some courses? And that led to, hey, do you think you could teach a course? And became one of their lead instructors back in around 2005, 2006. And what drew me to the FMS was the same thing that drew me to a lot of those other courses, that I always was fascinated by the assessment piece. That, you know what, why would I guess? When I went to the gym in the beginning, I guessed, but if I would have known this information ahead of time and had somebody tell me, no, you need to do these and not these, I could have saved a lot of wasted time. So anything that would teach me anything in terms of better information gathering and data gathering. So, I did every course I could, from a fitness side, but then also at the same time, my brother was going to school for his doctorate in physical therapy. So I'd steal his books and sneak into his classes and start to learn about stuff like Shirley Sarman, Vladimir Yanda, and concepts of movement and how people can gain better awareness and better performance through those types of avenues. And that led me down to all other trails, learning about, Alexander technique and Feldenkrais and all these different, and I said, you know what? everybody out here is this one trick pony, and it's all a kind of like pick your guru type of industry, right? I remember early on, I had a check shirt on at a conference, and a guy who I kind of knew, he goes, "Oh, I know who you are." He goes, "You're one of those check guys. I can't talk to you." I'm like, "What does that mean?" I'm also a Zatsiorsky guy. I'm also a Poliquin guy. I'm also like, I'm about 50 different guys. And why wouldn't you take all those things that you have at your disposal and put them all into one soup? And so ever since then, it's always been this accumulation of what else can I put into the recipe and make it better so I can make this a more efficient and effective process. And that's kind of what the education's been and continues to be. And so trying to look at things holistically and not just go a mile deep, but also be a mile wide. There's a great term that Kelly Starrett uses called being a savage generalist. And that's what I strive to be daily.
Wow, that's amazing. So you're like a sponge. It sounds like you started early, kind of. Most people have the back injuries later in life, right? And then they go through the MRI process and they go through that. And then maybe they get lucky enough for someone to tell them, maybe we should start getting stronger. And you came in from the other direction, right? And then we're talking the 90s.
This is mid to late 90s. Yeah.
So you actually had to read books, right? You had to seek out real teachers for this. Yeah.
There was nothing online. I mean, my original courses, and now I'm really dating myself. All my original like check information was on VHS. Like I have a bunch of courses on CDs. And like for your listeners, I'll have to explain what those are. VHSs were big boxes of tape that would get stuck in this giant machine. CDs were these little round metal circles that you'd have to play, and if you didn't stand completely still, they would skip. But that's how I got a lot of my education. There wasn't nearly as much available to it, and so it was more of a quest than it was just let it fall in your email inbox.
Yeah. And then it sounds like you, through tons of trial and error and learning, soaking it up and becoming an instructor over time, you became a better coach and trainer, which I think is a journey a lot of us have gone on, as opposed to, let's say, the person who gets everything from social media and maybe immediately goes out and is a guru, as you said before. So I guess if we step back and look at the big picture, what would you say from all this knowledge you've gained and all this synthesis and distillation of the information, that the big priorities, the big things that people should focus on if they're just getting started? So they're overwhelmed, right? They haven't gone through 2, 3, however many decades of learning that you did. Health, fitness, performance, where do they start?
That's a great question. So the first thing is have a critical eye. And even to this day, I always wake up with the assumption that everything I've learned to this point could be completely wrong, right? Because there's a lot of things that I did learn back then that have been dispelled. And it was at the time that was the best information that we had. Whether it was, remember, you had that magic window, you had to get your protein shake in after your workout, right? And so that's kind of been disproven. We thought that there was these really strict cutoff points that once you got to 6 reps, that's where hypertrophy kicked in. And then once you got to 12 or 15, then it shut off. Well, now you could really get that from like 3 to 30 reps, right? So always waking up every morning and being humble to say, you know what, everything I learned yesterday could be completely wrong. And I'm going to wake up today and try to prove it. And if at the end of the day, it still holds, then I'm probably going to keep that in my toolbox. And so like, if you look at different things that have come along in our industry at the two extremes, like yoga, there's a reason it's been around for thousands and thousands of years, because it stands the test of time. And there's so much gold and elegance and what is in that model, whatever version of it you've come to know. And then like curves was come and gone in a year. Right. And so, even with those things like that, and not to bash any one model, but there was still something in there that I'm going to say, okay, it worked for a while. What was it about it that worked, and where did they fail? Well, what worked for a while is they tapped into a segment of the population that we're not getting. And we can get into the weeds on this one. We're failing massively really to get people engaged, because the vast majority of people don't exercise. Right. The people that are listening to this, or we're preaching to the choir, right? It's the vast majority that are on scooters and Walmarts that are just broken, that we need to get to. But the challenge is how do we get to them? And what a place like Curves did is said, all right, we're going to give you a safe place. If you're someone who's an insecure, maybe overweight and female, we're going to give you a safe place to work out. And we were too just dumb of meatheads to realize the gym business up until recently was just it was just a meathead place. It intimidated people. It scared people away. And so they gave a safe space. So how can we capitalize on that and just give a better delivery of product, but still capitalize on that? You know, CrossFit, everybody likes to hate on CrossFit, but CrossFit has done an incredible job of changing our vision of what fitness is. And for a lot of people out there, up until they came along, it was, I go into a gym with shiny machines that I sit on a machine that does one thing. I look at the little placard and it says it does this muscle, and I do 10 reps. And then when I'm done, I go up on other machines. I go up on another machine and I just, you know, do that for a half hour with blinking lights. And that's what I thought fitness was. And, you know, that really bored the shit out of people and scared people away. So CrossFit made it one where, hey, I can do some athletic things. I can do things that are outside of that model. Two is it's tapping into there's an innate need in our DNA to be challenged, and they push that button. You're better than just doing a seated, you know, back and forth fixed machine. You can do more things. And then the biggest thing is they created a culture where they're extremely loyal within that brand. And so it created a culture where people felt comfortable and people wanted to be part of that. And so those are some of the things we need to tap into in the fitness industry that we're not doing a really good job of. We're getting better at it because we're getting a better demographic involved with us. But that's something that as trainers and coaches, that is a blind spot for us.
Matt, I agree with everything you said. There's a lot to unpack, but I want to touch on a couple things. So the CrossFit story is my story, just so you know. Most of my life was pretty sedentary. I didn't have an athletic background like you, and it was maybe when we were pregnant with our first kid that I said I need to get in shape, and CrossFit called to me for whatever reason. And I credit it for learning about barbells, learning the Olympic lifts, right? Maybe it injured me along the way too, but you know, I learned a lot from it. And your insight here about appealing to more people and the average person who's just sitting out there not working out. How do we take something that we know is effective, right? You mentioned, I hate to use the term evidence-based, but effectively what you described earlier was the scientific method of taking things that work, jettisoning things that don't, and continuing to refine what we know and not assuming that we know everything. How do we take that approach combined with whatever we think is the most effective form of training? Maybe it's strength, maybe it's hypertrophy or whatever for an individual, and get them to do that. So like if we think strength is the foundation, how do we get more, you know, soccer moms to be interested in that?
So I think, and this is going to be a little bit different answer than trying to sell people on strength training, because I don't need to sell you on strength training. I need to sell the person who has no clue. And if we try to sell them on all the research and the data and all that stuff, they know all that. And everybody knows that we shouldn't be eating cheese-filled pretzels at the mall, but we still do it, right? So I'm going to say the first two things is, and this is a skill set that I don't think we have enough as coaches and trainers, is we need to be able to create an avenue of honesty and awareness. Okay. And I think that's where we need to start. Number one, awareness, to realize that most people don't know what they don't know. There's kind of that famous 4 levels of competence. There's the bottom layer is unconscious incompetence. You're screwed up and you don't even know it. Right. That's when someone walks into me and they do a movement screen, or we do something. They're like, wow, I can't even balance on one leg, or I can't even rotate to the right. I didn't even know, you know, walking around. But now that I know, the next tier is that conscious incompetence, meaning I'm screwed up, but what do I do about it? That's where most Western medicine leaves you. They're going to slap you with a label and you have itis or whatever they're going to call it. And okay, I got that, but what do I do about it? Or am I just, that's my scarlet letter I got to live with, that I have SI joint issues, or I have, sciatica, or I have all these things that people label themselves with and they don't even know what it means. Then the next step is conscious competence, meaning you can do this, you can fix this, but you're going to have to be very aware to do it. It means you're going to have to change your habits. You're going to have to change your awareness. You're going to have to gain that. And once you do that for long enough, then that's going to become natural. It's going to become reflexive. That's the ultimate layer that we got to get you to, is this unconscious incompetence, where you don't think twice about, going for a walk as part of your day, because that's now part of who you are. And part of that awareness piece is also getting the awareness of, where are you coming into this, and at what point are you coming into this? And I always say, when we write a program, I need to know 3 things. I need to know about your past. What was your medical history, injury history, training history, all those things coming into it, because that's all going to factor in. Then I need to know where your present is. And that's where we really need to be honest. And that's where evaluation will kind of sift some of that out. And it's not to say, oh, you're dysfunctional or imbalanced or all the terms that we like to use, but it's to say, okay, well, here's where we need to start, right? We can get to a lot of places. This isn't where you're going to end, but this is where we're going to start. And at that point is an interesting awareness piece of where are you coming to it from. So you have two different segments of the population I talk about. You have people that are fragile and you have people that are broken. Right. The fragile people are the ones that since COVID have done the most movement they've done is to go get up and get the DoorDash. Right. That they're very sedentary. And so because of that, their bodies are starting to wilt away and break down. And so that person comes into you and they say, oh, my shoulder, my hip, my knee hurts. Right. That's going to be a very different person than the broken person. The broken person is the one who might have still been sitting on a couch doing Zooms for the last 3 years, but they've gone out and they've done obstacle course races or joined CrossFit or did whatever. And now their shoulder, hip, or their knee or back hurts. They're two very different people. If you just get out your recipe sheet for here's what I do for knee pain, you're going to fail miserably. Neither of those people are going to get better because they're there for different reasons. And they also may be going back to different environments. So you need to know what's the future. Where do I need to get you to? Do you want to just be able to get up and down the stairs without pain? Or do you want to go play competitive tennis? And part of that is challenging people to say, is that all that you expect of yourself? Right. So at some point you looked yourself in the mirror and said, like, I don't want to feel like this. Like, I'm better than this. And like, barbells don't scare me. This is actually kind of fun. And I expect more of myself at my age to be doing what I'm doing and kind of being able to push that button and have that real adult conversation to say, what is sufficient for you? And are you at that point? And, what are you willing to trade off to get to that point? Because it may mean you got to go to bed a little bit earlier. It may mean you got to maybe change your diet a little bit. And it may mean that you're going to have to do some training that may be a little bit uncomfortable at points, but that's going to get you to where you're going to be satisfied with your level of physical sufficiency. And so that's really a different approach, is really coming at it from an awareness and honesty place to say, if you got the person who's fragile, they're scared to death to move. My brother, does research and he's, looked at outcomes and he studies outcomes for a living. And he looked at what is one of the main reasons people fail in physical therapy. It is number one is fear and avoidance of movement. They're scared shit to move, right? So you tell that person, hey, you need to go train and work out. They're scared to death. So how do I get them in a non-intimidating way to get them to embrace movement? And then for the broken person, right? A lot of times they're broken because they're and I'm going to date myself again. Remember Al Bundy? Right.
Sure.
From Married with Children, who always talked about how he scored 4 touchdowns in the state championship game. Well, there's an entire demographic that's one of the demographics that I seem to be getting a lot of, is that 35 to 65-year-old that scored 4 touchdowns in the state championship game and thinks they're still that person. Meanwhile, they haven't moved in 10, 20 years and they want to be that person. And they're frustrated that they're not that person, but they can't. But if they go and start an exercise routine and they just go load up the bench and they wreck their shoulder, like, well, I guess I'm ready for the rocking chair now. I guess I'm broken. I can't do that anymore. And it's like, no, you're better than that. You may not be able to go back to exactly what you were at 18, but you could be a lot better than you were now. And looking at the front, windshield as opposed to the rear view, you got your later years coming at you really fast. And what do you want those to look like? Peter Attia does a very elegant job of talking about your marginal decade and say, that's the last 10 years of your life. What do you want that to look like? And if you want to still be able to carry the groceries and go upstairs and not be a burden to your family, well, we know that just the science shows you're going to lose a certain amount of growth hormone or a certain amount of mobility and so forth every decade. So we got to get ahead of that. And if you're 50 now, that means you should be here if you want to be there at 75. So we need to do everything we need to do to get you there right now. And framing it that way is coming from an honest place that people can really appreciate, that they want to be challenged.
Yeah, you're just throwing tons of wisdom at me, Eric. I'm trying to keep up with everything here. But here's what comes to mind. If someone is listening and they say, this is amazing, so I need to increase my awareness, understand where I've been, where I want to go. So it's going to be very goal specific, right? We have to have individualized approach that deals with my injury history and things like that. And I know a lot of people want to figure things out for themselves. Like you said, some people just jump right into exercising. And we talk about the difference in exercise and training, or I think you talk about a workout versus a program.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, short of having an amazing coach like you, and hopefully there's coaches out there that are accessible to people, but can someone do a self-assessment and kind of figure this out on their own? Should they be working with a coach? What's the thought process? What's the general process to avoid injury and start on the right footing?
Okay. So yeah, you need to kind of figure out where you're at now, because it's just as the assessment is basically writing your program. So when I'm doing an assessment on somebody, day one, first thing I tell you is, Philip, I have no idea what I'm going to do with you. Right. And you're like, what are you talking about? You've been doing this 25 years.
Where's your
I have no idea what I'm going to do with you. Now, an hour later, I'm going to have a real good idea what to do with you and what not to do with you. Because as we go through an assessment, that writes the program for me. So it's going to tell me there's certain things. So it's, it's kind of like a menu. And if you have certain food intolerances or food allergies, going in looking at a menu, there's certain foods you just need to avoid. Right. And it's same thing with exercise, that if you can't touch your toes, probably deadlifting, kettlebell swings, not the best thing for you. Could you get away with it a couple times? Sure. But you can also get away with smoking Marlboro Reds and drinking whiskey every day for a while. Right. Sometimes longer than others, but I wouldn't use that as my plan for living a long, healthy life. So kind of knowing what that menu is, and then the better you move, the more that menu expands, the more fit you are, the more that menu expands. So figuring out what's my menu to start with, what can I and can I not do. Now, the low hanging fruit is like just going for a walk. That's, everybody can do that. And some people don't even, we were talking before we went on and talking about Twitter debates. And like, there was a Twitter debate about if walking counts as exercise. And it made me want to quit the industry on the spot. And it's like, this is really what we're arguing about. Why? Like, of course it's exercise. It makes a huge impact. Even if you're fit, it's going to make an impact in terms, you could, use that for recovery. You can use that for a lot of things. So like, this is why people don't want to exercise, because we're idiots arguing about trap bar deadlifts and if walking counts. Yep. Right. So, that's where you kind of start. So a coach is going to be really helpful to decipher that, because you're going to save a lot of time. And what is time is your most valuable asset. It's the one thing that'll never come back. This day, this time will never be here again. So how much is your time worth? So with that, for me, I'd rather save the time and invest a little bit up front and say, hey, where do I start? Now, if you get a good coach, the other thing they'll do is they'll not make you dependent on them. My goal is to get the training wheels off as soon as possible, so you don't need me anymore. I'm not here for you to count your reps or count your sets or show you exercises. I have means I can deliver that to you through an app and through videos and those sorts of things. The last thing I want to do is watch you exercise. My thing is to get you the game plan, right? You can get exercise for free on YouTube. Don't pay me for that, right? The thing is, you don't know which ones to do. You don't know when to do them. You don't know how many to do. You don't know, how to structure all of that. So that's what I'm here for. Don't come to me for exercises. If you're just getting exercises, then like you said earlier, that's just a workout. Now, that's not to say a workout's a bad thing. Every once in a while, a workout may be fun. You can go do something that's a workout and it's fun, but it may not get to your goal. That's what a program is. And there's a big difference between the two. Now, workouts can be within a program, provided they're specific for what your needs and goals are.
Got it. And I think the parallel in the nutrition space, because that's what I do, would be, don't come to me for a macro plan. Don't come to me for a meal plan, right? We're trying to learn a bunch of skills that'll allow you to fire me in 6 months and choose how to get to your goal whenever you want in the future. So I like that analogy from a training perspective. And actually, a few years back, my back squat was terrible, and I finally said I've got to get a coach, because I had coaches over the years, but I got stubborn and said I can do this myself. Finally got a coach, and in 1 hour he fixed the things that had been plaguing me for 2 years. So just for the listeners out there, the time is money thing is really important, because now you've avoided years of potential injury and lack of progress. So yeah, I like that analogy, workout and a program. And we talked about it has to be individualized based on your goals, based on your movement capabilities. So and you said people will get stronger generally if they start on a movement they may be weakened. But let's talk about what did you say, broken, I think, person?
Fragile and broken.
Fragile and broken. And I don't know if broken also includes, let's say, an older client who might have arthritis in their shoulder and they just can't do an overhead press, for example. What, how would you handle that situation?
So my first question back is, why can't they do the overhead press,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the arthritis doesn't necessarily tell me anything, because if you took an MRI and an X-ray of everything in my body right now, God knows what you'd find. Most doctors would tell me to lay in bed and don't move, right? But I still do everything I need to do. Yesterday I front squatted, I did pull-ups, I do all those things, and so if we look at a lot of these things, we can get scared. And unfortunately, there's some unscrupulous clinicians who prey on that to say, oh, you have a bulging discs, you have this disc, you have this spinal abnormality. You know what? 90% of people over 35 have that. If if all those caused direct back pain, everybody be be writhing in pain right now, but they're not. Most of that's asymptomatic. So why is this an issue for you? Is it a mobility problem? Right. And if it's a mobility problem, is it something I can even do something about? Is it a mobility problem because there's a joint issue? Well, that you may need to get some clinicians' hands on, or it may not be able to be fixed other than surgical. Or is it a motor control problem? Is it a strength issue? Is it any one of these issues? That's what we have to filter out first. So now I'm not guessing, because just to make the assumption, oh, I have arthritis in my shoulder, I can't overhead press. Well, I don't buy that. I have to find out why, and find out why do you have the restriction. And then there may very well be a restriction. And then here's the reality. You could also live a really long, happy life without doing an overhead press. And so I still need to give you the capability to get your arms overhead so you get something out of the cabinet, or get your shirt on. But it doesn't mean I need to overhead press a dumbbell. There's a lot of different ways I can go about that. And there's a lot of different, artful ways I could make regressions and lateralizations, to steal a Charlie Weingroff term, of those things that will create a similar effect without causing more damage.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a fair point, right? People get stuck in thinking they have to do certain movements to get stronger. Or they have to get certain movements to build muscle. And you're saying that there are plenty of options there, and you have to work with the person and figure out what it is.
Now, here's the other thing. I'll as a counter argument to those people who get caught in this dogmatic thing of you have to do your push pull strength, right? All that whole laundry list that we all know is, are you training? The term the phrase I like to use: are you training to get good at exercise, or you're training to get good? Right. So there's a lot of people who move really, really well. Like, go watch a martial artist, go watch like Ido Portal or somebody like that move, and ask them when the last time you did a dumbbell overhead press. Like, we're so dogmatic, and we're thinking that it has to be confined to this set of exercises. And what if I get better at that? Did I really get stronger, or did I just get good at an exercise? Right. Real strength is where I can walk into any setting and I can actually apply that. Right. If I'm only good at your exercises that you pick based on a set of confirmation biases that you have, I'm just good at your workout. I'm not really strong. Right. When I can actually go and do things, like the joke I like to use is, if you work out all the time, but you still can't help me move a couch, your workout sucks. Right. You should be able to apply that, in multiple ways. Now, there is some levels of specificity. You're not going to go from being a champion cyclist to a champion marathon runner. We saw that with Lance Armstrong. He's the greatest cyclist in history, but was a middle of the pack marathoner. There is some specificity in there, but there's a general physical preparedness that, you don't need to do. You could never touch a barbell or a dumbbell and still be very, very capable at those things.
Agree. Yeah. So I imagine the average person, at least the person I deal with, who's just looking to improve their body composition generally, right? That's, I would say, the majority of people who don't have a specific performance goal, or maybe a longevity goal. Where would they start? Let's say they're a female in their 40s who runs a lot. This is a very common archetype I see, right? They do a lot of Pilates, running, yoga, hiking, all this kind of stuff, and just wants to improve their strength and body composition. I mean, I kind of know where I would take her, but I want to hear your take on that. Where would you start?
Okay. So, again, just create some basic awareness. Okay. So what's going to create change, in your body composition? Realize that number one, in nature, in the nature of our cells, is that we're fighting to just live another day. Every cell in your body has one job, and it's to live to the next day. And so it's going to adapt to whatever you do to it. So whether it's hot in the room and you sweat, or it's cold and you shiver, it's going to adapt. And so with that, if you're going to create change, you have to create some sort of stimulus to create that change. Now, if you've been doing the same program for a year, 2 years, whatever time it is, and you're not continually changing, well, then because there's not enough stimulus to create an adaptation. Now, so that's number one. So we have to create a stimulus that's going to create that change. And what is the specific adaptation that we're looking for, right? If we want to look better in the mirror, well, that's just basically, 3 layers. The most simplistic level, you have your muscle, you have your skin, and then you got stuff that's in between there. The stuff is what you don't like. The stuff is what makes your shirt uncomfortable, doesn't make you not want to be in a picture, all that kind of stuff. That's got to go away, right? So you can see the muscle. And then when you get there, hopefully there's some muscle to see, or you're just a skinny fat person, right? And so we need to account for that muscle being there to actually be worth looking at. And then the stuff in between, well, that's really just your energy balance. And so with that energy balance, it's a matter of calories in, calories out at the most fundamental level. And then with that, what's going to be the habits and processes that are going to make you most successful to stay in that energy balance? Could you eat Fruit Loops and stay under your caloric deficit? Yes, you absolutely can. It's just not a real good recipe. Forget the health aspects. Who cares? I just want to look good in the mirror. It's going to be hard to sustain that, right? Because you're going to, any kid who's ever woken up to watch cartoons on a Saturday morning knows you're not going to eat just one bowl. You're going to keep going till the box is gone. And whereas, nobody ever ate way too much spinach, right? I'm sure you love the people that come in and say, well, I heard bananas are high in sugar. I shouldn't eat those. And say, look, in 20 years, no one's ever come in and said, oh, I got so fat eating these bananas. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. So let's get the reality of what are you actually eating? Are you even aware of that? And so let's capture what you're actually eating and start to track that. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to weigh and measure everything for the rest of your life, but you need to be aware that, holy crap, I didn't realize there's, 700 calories in that whipped cream fancy thing that I get at Starbucks every day. So save yourself $9 and just have a black coffee, right? Or have a cup of tea or something like that. That's our first step. And what habits can we change from a caloric deficit standpoint that are going to allow you to be successful? Usually having more protein is going to make you more successful. Usually making sure you get enough fiber in greens and fruits and grains and those things. That'll help you be more successful because you're just not all that hungry after you've eaten enough of that, at least less hungry than if you eaten a bowl of Fruit Loops. So let's create the awareness on that path, right? And then if you've gotten that dialed down, then we can always go deeper. But most people, that's where their biggest struggle is, right? Yeah. Make sure we get enough water, make sure we get enough protein, make sure we get enough, greens and grains and that kind of stuff and fiber. And then, you know what, if it still needs to get more dialed in, then we can always go deeper. And then in terms of exercise, we need something that's gonna add a little bit of muscle. Doesn't mean you're gonna be a bodybuilder, especially for that woman in her 40s. Unless you're taking steroids, I don't know about. You're not gonna get too big. I've spent the last 20 years trying to get too big. I wish it happened that easy.
That's right? The answer. You could try to get too big and you won't get there. Yeah.
Yes. Never has that been a problem. Oh my gosh, I have way too much muscle. So we need to have some concern for muscle, and we need to do that with some level of strength training. It doesn't have to be bars on your back. It doesn't have to be some type of, fancy bodybuilding split, but you need to do something that's going to create some change. The deeper you get, the more you're going to need to get a little bit more specific. But in the beginning, if you have no exposure to it, doing some simple body weight stuff is going to be more than enough. So let's start there. And then the other thing I want to do is to make this something that's doable, because what's the challenge most people have? The most famous 4 words in diet and exercise, especially with body composition, is it all starts Monday, right? Is that they can't stay consistent and create the habit. So I said, all right, let's make this livable. All right. Now, there are some exceptions to this because there are some people that have true food addictions, but let's talk about just the general person who's not in that subcategory. I tell them we're going to live by the 80-20 rule. If you follow everything I asked you to do from an exercise and diet standpoint, 80% of the time, the other 20%, screw off, have whatever you want to have. You want to have a slice of pizza, whatever, ice cream, whatever your vice is. Or if you skip a workout and you're supposed to do 5 days a week, you do 4, I'll still take it and you'll still get to where you want to be at a reasonable pace that you'll be happy with, right? And so that way we can honestly now look, when you hand me a food log and I look at your journal of what you've eaten and say, okay, well, you're really like 50-50. That's not 80-20, right? If you want to have the freedom to go and get that slice of pizza, you got to dial it up a notch, right? Because you're 50-50 right now. and then starting to kind of challenge them, say, okay, you got to push this thing 80-20. You can't go 100, right? I shouldn't say that. You can.
It's
but
restrictive.
But here's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You're going to be miserable. Like I went 100. I competed in bodybuilding. I brought a cooler bag to family dinners. You know what that's like, being an Italian guy from Jersey when you show up with 60 people eating trays of food and you have a cooler bag.
Yeah, totally normal, right? Totally normal.
And your grandfather's yelling at you in Italian trying to figure out what's your problem. So like that's bizarre. That's not normal behavior. Right. But I was doing it for a specific goal. And so what the specific goal is it changes your percentages. So I tell people they're in one of two categories. I'd like to change. I'm in no specific rush, but obviously the sooner the better. Good. You're an 80-20 person to start. Then the second person is I have a tryout. I have a workout. I have the beginning of my season, or I have a wedding. I have a vacation that I have to be ready for. Well, you may not get 80-20. You may get 90-10. Right. So that 3 or 4, slip ups you get during the week turns into 1 or 2, or maybe none if we're getting closer and you're not there ready enough, because that date's not changing. You're not going to push back your vacation 2 weeks. So we have to dial it up a little bit more. But this is going into it knowing that this is specific for this time period. This is not going to be the rest of your life. And I think framing it in that is a little bit easier to handle, because now it's anything I want. I don't feel like I'm trapped. I don't feel like the way I actually do it with nutrition is I give, and I do this a lot because I work a lot with high school kids, but I do it for everybody, and say, okay, we do the math. You're supposed to eat, say, 3 meals plus a snack. That's over 7 days, 28 meals. So let's make it easy for math. That's 25 to 30 meals. That gives you about 4 or 5 meals that you can have whatever you want. So I want you to wake up every Monday morning. You got 5 magic tickets. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to cash that in for whatever crap you want to eat, right? You want to go have your fruity drink. You want to go have your pizza, your ice cream, whatever it is. And what you're going to do is you're going to keep them in your back pocket. Don't go out Monday morning for a stack of waffles and ice cream, right? Because then you blew all your tickets and now you got to suffer the rest of the week. What you're going to do is get in situations. And if you have a work dinner, or if your friends are going out for pizza, don't be the weirdo with a dry lettuce leaf in the corner, and ostracize yourself and torture yourself. Have your slice of pizza, just hand in a ticket and say, I'm okay with it, right? If you get to the weekend and you got a couple tickets left, you go out for a nice dinner, you have ice cream, whatever you want to have, because they all wash away. You can't carry them over from week to week. And then that way it's like anything I want to really have I really have a hankering for, I really want, it's no more than 4 or 5 days away. So it makes it a whole lot easier to manage that. And this is something I can stick with for a long period of time, as opposed to I'm going to do the 6-week, better abs program.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I mean, going back to the tracking to start, I know there's controversy people have when it comes to tracking. Does it cause issues? And I think the evidence supports that, tracking is associated with better outcomes, assuming you didn't have some issue beforehand with tracking. But your strategy of how do we deal with emotional and compulsive eating? We do it by thinking ahead and planning. And there's different ways to do it. And I like your strategy of the tickets. I actually hadn't heard that. Are these physical tickets? Or
No, they're mental tickets in your head.
Because that could work too. Yeah, and I've heard strategies like banking for the weekend, or planning for a specific day ahead of time, pre-logging. There's all these strategies, but the whole theme, I think, is you're thinking ahead in with a cool head before you get into the moment. And you've planned for it, right? You're planning for your weekly calories. You know what you're trying to hit a specific goal. And like you said, if someone doesn't have a weigh-in coming up, for example, on a very strict goal, they have a little bit of leeway. You're still trying to hit a specific calorie target for the week, right? We're not just willy-nilly saying that we can eat, 2 whole pizzas on Saturday, right? It still has to fit within there. So yeah, I agree with everything you said. And okay, I guess that answers the question. So what about, let's turn to, I guess, performance then. If we did have somebody that had a slightly stricter goal for performance, this doesn't have to be diet related. We could talk training again. It could be powerlifting, could be sports, endurance. What are the biggest obstacles that prevent them from performing at their best?
So I just break it down systematically and say, okay, make sure we're not going to miss anything. That's everything I do is just basically a checklist, right? So I love the work that Atul Gawande did in his book, Checklist Manifesto, where he just talks about the impact and power of checklists. And he used it in medicine, but I translate that into training. So, okay, on my big global checklist to say, especially for performance, there's 3 fundamental layers. So like Gray Cook was one of my mentors, used it as movement, performance, and skill. and to kind of take a step back so people can understand that the layperson, when I explain it to them, I say there's competency, there's capacity, and then skill. So competency is, can you even get into the positions and shapes and postures you need to get in to perform that thing, whatever that thing is you're going to do. So you want to go play tennis. Can you even rotate? Can you even lunge to decelerate? Can you get balance on a single leg? Can you do all those things that are going to show up on a tennis court? Because if you can't even get to those positions in a slow, controlled environment now, you certainly aren't going to get into them at least well, once we get out there at full speed and the ball's coming at you. So I want to check the competency box. Do you at least have that baseline of movement competency? Then from there, I'm going to look at your capacity and to say, okay, are you physically fit enough to play that sport? And then that means you need to generate you need to have a certain amount of strength. You need to generate a certain amount of power and speed, have a certain a level of agility and so forth. And then from there, we can look at the specifics of, hey, I can't get to my forehand because of a lack of, rotation of my T-spine, or I'm struggling with my serve because I can't get hip extension. Whatever that may be, we can dial that down, but most people go right to that, right? They're going to come in and say, oh, I went and my tennis coach said I can't get hip extension. He gave me these stretches I should do. I'll say, whoa, back up. Okay, so did you know that you can't even touch your toes? Like, that would probably be a bigger start than trying to do some really specific stretch, because maybe if we clear up the big global stuff, that really local specific stuff, that may just go away. And we also may check a whole lot of other boxes in between. So we kind of start global, and then we'll go down to regional, and then we'll go down to really local when it comes to movement. And then the same thing will happen when it comes to the levels of competency, and then translating that to skill. So that's really just the checklist that I go through. And the higher you go up the chain, the more specific you get. So that's really how I kind of go through that journey with an athlete and explain to them that we're still going to have to go back and check those boxes every once in a while, because if we get too deep into capacity, we may actually steal from some of our competency, right? And I've seen that too many times. I worked in the NFL for 9 years, where more than one athlete has told me, I moved so much better before I got into the NFL. Now, obviously, there's the physicality of the game that beats them up, but they say just athletically, I was just more athletic before I got here, and they kind of train that out of me, unfortunately. And we have to make sure that we don't do that we don't screw people up.
Now, as far as capacity, is there an aspect of capacity that is universal? I mean, between different sports and different types of athletes, where you see a recurring theme that's common, if you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah. There's some baseline, markers, and that's, again, having a system. You have baseline markers to say, okay, once we've hit this, unless you have a very specific goal for strength, as an example, I think we're strong enough. And then now we can move on to other things, right? And I have those things. So a lot of times I'll start off athletes with a lot of unilateral training in the beginning. Say, okay, I want to have you be able to do a single arm floor press. I want to have you be able to do a Bulgarian split squat. I want to do a single leg RDL. And for every one of those, I have markers relative to body weight that I want you to be able to hit. Once you can hit those, if we need to go deeper down the road of strength, then that's where we can get, more specific that way. But once we've kind of hit those, my job is just to maintain those. And every once in a while, I'll keep those in there just to make sure we're still hitting those marks. But now there's a lot of other boxes to check. Like when I talk about my performance pyramid with an athlete, there's 59 boxes of things that we want to look at. So I say, I can't spend all my time working on strength. It's one. I got 58 others I got to get to. So
yeah, you want to get to a minimum. Okay.
By having markers to say, at least you've hit the minimum. Now, do you need more than the minimum for your sport? That depends. Like, how strong do you really need to be to hit a golf ball? How strong do you really need to be to ride a bike? Obviously, more would be beneficial, but if it comes at the expense of other things I'm not getting to that are even more beneficial, that's a prioritization problem. Okay.
Does anybody like Bulgarian split squats?
I mean, weirdos like me, kind of like them, but, doing an ISO version of that's even more, sadistic, and no one's ever said, hey, can we do more split holds? But
where do you hold that position for the ISO? Is that
at the bottom? Yeah. At the bottom, hit the bottom of that and hang out there for 30 seconds. ISOs are a very powerful thing. They've kind of come back in vogue in the last year or so. They're finding lots of correlations with helping with tendon strength and so forth, but it's always a great place for me to start with people Because with that, when you take away the moving parts, literally, it's a lot easier to figure stuff out. So get in the bottom of that. All right, I want you to feel where your pelvis is. I want you to feel how your foot's contacting the floor. I want you to feel what your spine feels like now. And we can make these little adjustments to create awareness, because that's tough to do when they're moving up and down. So doing these different positions, and there's probably a subset of about 5 or 6 that I really like to use in the beginning stages of training, to get people aware of these positions and shapes and postures, to say, okay, get in that position now, feel what it feels like to elevate your chest. Okay, now feel what it feels like to, a cue I'll use, spread out your collarbones and get open in your shoulders. Get your head back into a position. That's a lot easier to learn for the end user when they're in a static position first.
Yeah, I like that idea. I mean, there's versions of that. I guess you could say something like a pause squat, where again you're in one position, but the idea of using isometrics for that, I haven't quite heard that before. I think a study recently came out about calf training as well that looked at isometrics and saw a great benefit for, but I think that was for hypertrophy. So speaking of athletics, what about an older guy? I'm not old, but an older guy like me who's never been athletic. One of the reasons I joined CrossFit years ago was to get in that kind of environment. I mean, how would somebody like that who isn't looking to compete or perform athletically, as part of a team necessarily, approach that? What kind of goal would be a reasonable goal for them to pursue?
Well, provided we've checked the box for movement competency and they have no restrictions, they have a full menu to order from, right? That's where we look at some simple things. And if I had to have a checklist of like desert island things that you could do, jump rope's going to be really high on that list. Okay. So it creates not agility is the wrong word. It creates rhythm, which is a hugely impactful thing on athleticism. I had Lee Taft on our podcast, who's brilliant, and talking about the impact of rhythm on athleticism. I always joke that you look at the most athletic people, they have 2 things. They have rhythm. I'm going to write a book, and it's going to be called Rhythm and Glutes, because you need to have some level of rhythm. There's an elegance to when you watch a really good athlete, watch a Tyreek Hill run a route, watch a Steph Curry play basketball. There's just such a fluidity and rhythm to that. And then you need to get the force power from somewhere, and it's on that posterior chain. Most is where a lot of it starts. It's not all of it, but it's where a lot of it starts. So I joke, if you see somebody with a flat ass at a game, it's usually a referee or a spectator. So you need to, one of the ways to start with the rhythm and to also get you more elastic, so you can get up on the ball of your foot and you can have that elasticity and actually have the stiffness, not lack of range of motion stiffness, but stiffness and spring in your ankle. Jump rope is a great place to start. Number 1. From there, once you've established
is that singles or doubles, or doesn't matter?
Just figure it out in the beginning. Just figure it out. And then what you want to have is some simple things. Number 1 is make sure the knee is straight, so you're getting that spring in the ankle. If you have what I call a squishy knee and you keep collapsing, then you're all working from the hip and the whole body's involved. You shouldn't look like that. You should look pretty much straight line, ear to ankle, and just spring off of that ball of your foot. Then should be a rhythm and cadence to it. Like I'll have people and I'll just clap my hands and have them keep to a certain rhythm. I'll even put like an EDM or, kind of, house music on and say, keep the beat to that, right? Create some rhythm and create some cadence with that. And can you do that? And then my last cue is always make it look easy, like smile, relax, breathe through your nose. You shouldn't be grinding. You shouldn't be gripping the handles, like get smooth and relaxed. That's going to have such carryover to athleticism, whether you're playing pickup basketball or tennis or whatever it may be. So that's where I start. And then from there, the next thing is sprinting. Right, being able to sprint and like go all out, because there's a big difference, and that's why you see go to any beer league softball game, and you'll see a bunch of people with yanked hamstrings and torn Achilles, because even though that person may go to the gym and jog 5 miles a day, there's a whole different representation and synchronization of how your muscles work when you change over from a jog to a sprint. And then as soon as you have that high demand, if I need to use this right now on your Achilles, on your hamstrings, that's when they pop, and they don't have that. So you need to work up to being able to do some sprinting. And it doesn't have to be long. You're not doing gassers here. You're not doing this for conditioning. You're doing it to be able to access the muscles you do have, access the strengths you do have right away, right? And so can I just do, and there's some really simple protocols you could follow. Zach Dekamp from whereas he's at TCU, has some great protocols. Derek Hansen has this very simple 10 yards, 10 sprints protocol that he uses. Just sprint 10 yards all out, like hairs on fire, walk back, and then do it 10 times, and then do multiple rounds of that. Like really simple stuff like that. That's where I would start. And if I could only pick two, those would be the things I would do.
Jump rope and sprint. Yeah, I like that. I used to love the what is it, death by 10-meter sprints or whatever they did in CrossFit. That's excellent. So kind of related to
no,
that.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but going back to that,
Yeah.
That's sprinting for conditioning, right?
Okay,
that's not what I'm talking about. And that's really dependent on your goal. And if you're doing it for conditioning, great. But if you're doing it to improve your speed and athleticism, there needs to be enough time for you to recharge and have quality. And so like there's a system that I use when I have athletes sprint, where they'll sprint either for distance or for time, whether it's you're going to sprint a 40-yard sprint or you're going to sprint for 5 seconds, whatever it may be. And you're going to take an ample amount of rest. So you may take 2-3 minutes, and then your job is in your every rep is to meet or beat, or at least come within 10% of that last one. So if I gave you for easy math, I gave you 5 seconds to run 50 seconds or 50, and you got 50 yards, your next rep has to be at least 45 yards in those 5 seconds. Once you can't meet that marker, your quality has gone down, and now all we're going to do is get really good at being slow. So that's going to be my quality control. And if you can do that 10 times, great. If you get 2 and you lose that quality and you drop off more than 10%, go home. You're done.
Interesting. So it almost sounds like you can combine this. I know some people like to do short hit sessions, Tabata or 1-2, 1-3 ratio, all out versus rest. It almost sounds like it could fit in there, from a time efficiency standpoint, with the addition that you control the quality, like you said, and try to hit that time. Don't just go all out and start slowing down.
You would have to be pretty fit to do this on a Tabata protocol or that shorter rest period. Yeah. So if you're doing it for conditioning, that's going to be a different animal. If you're doing it for speed, you need a ton of rest, and you're not going to do a ton of reps either. Like if you go all out and do, even 6 all out sprints anywhere from 20 to 40 yards, you're going to know it if you've done it truly the way you should do it. There was a football team that a high school football team that I used to work with a lot of their players. Their coach had this thing, and I guess because it sounded cool, where they'd run 40-40s, and it was horrible for every aspect. It doesn't translate to football. All it did was give me a ton of business, because the amount of Achilles, low back, hip flexor strains, hamstring pulls that I got from this one school, because that was their protocol. It was great for business, but it was horrible what they put these kids through.
Yeah, that's crazy. So I get your point, fair point about the conditioning versus the athletic development, and recovery. I think is important from a even larger perspective for a lot of people that I see working out 4, 5, 6 days a week. And I've gone through this myself, where you just get beat up, right? And it kind of, even when you try to take deloads, it seems to catch up with you and never quite go away. I mean, how do older folks manage that volume and manage that recovery, who really like to work out?
Okay. So I use tons of analogies. So I always explain this to clients in the beginning, that you're basically the farmer, and you have seeds and you have soil. Your training is the seeds, and the soil is what happens the other 23 hours in the day. Now, if you go and plant your seeds on a rubber workout floor, nothing's going to grow there. So what makes you have rich, fertile soil? It's your habits and activities. Those are the 23 hours a day. It's number 1, your sleep. Number 2, or 1B is your nutrition. So if you're up till 2 in the morning, watching Netflix or playing Call of Duty, and you're, drinking soda or bang drinks or whatever it may be, and that's the only way you can keep yourself going, eventually, you're just kind of living on credit, and that bill's going to come. So what you do those other 23 hours gives you the fertile soil of where you can grow more. And so if you put an active focus on your recovery, it's going to allow you to train harder. I mean, the ultimate is when guys and people use steroids, because it boosts your recovery, so they can train for endless time and not break down as much. And as soon as they come off, they fall apart. So it's really managing how much recoverability have you built, how much resiliency have you built, and then that tells me how much I can push and how hard I can push. And there are great markers you can use to kind of gauge that, to know when it's time to peel back or when it's time to go. And I have a readiness screen that I teach in our course and that I use to do with my clients every morning. It takes about 3 minutes, and it looks at your movement competency for that day, because maybe you could rotate freely both ways last time I saw you, but since I saw you, you might have slept on the couch or had a cross-country flight, or you played 72 holes of golf, and all of a sudden you can't rotate right. And I was supposed to have you do some sort of medicine ball drill or something, and I want to know that before I get started, right? So I look at your movement competency, and then I look at some other markers that just kind of look at your overall global readiness, whether it's looking at your grip strength, whether it's looking at a timed breath hold, or if you have technology that can tell me about your resting heart rate, tell me about your heart rate variability. All those things put into the soup kind of give me a picture of where you're at, as well as their own self-assessment. And they're not going to offer that information coming in the door. They're going to come in and they're just assume they're going to do the workout. And then all of a sudden I put them through stuff, and, you normally hold your breath for about 25 seconds. Today was 14 seconds. What's up? Well, I slept like crap. I'm stressed out. Work's been really brutal. And now you're starting to reframe. Okay, well, this isn't the same organism that I wrote this program for. Mm-hmm. I might need to change what I'm doing here. I can't plant the same seeds the same way that I thought. And so I need to adapt that program to that individual. So looking at those factors, if you have ability to look a little bit deeper, and that's, things like an Aura ring that looks at your sleep, or something that looks at your HRV, like a Morpheus strap or one of those types of things, mm-hmm. It's going to, the accuracy of some of those things comes into question sometimes, but sure. It's not going to, if we're not really, if we're using it just for general awareness, is to say, wow, I never realized that, when I have a couple drinks at night, my HRV crashes. Right. Maybe not try to have that drink and see if that affects my workout the next day. Sure. Or if I go to bed a half hour earlier, my workout, I'm a different person. My focus the next day at work is completely different. And again, it goes back to that honesty and awareness piece of, wow, I didn't realize these things that we're doing were either building or detracting from my health.
Yeah, I love that. Not only the 23 hours being the focus, but building that awareness. It's great when you have a coach who can help you do that assessment before the workout, but even collecting the data, like you said, and looking at the trend. I actually have an Aura ring myself, so I know what you mean, where you're just like, oh, what's happening? Or you ate too late, or, like you said, you had a few drinks, something like that. All right. Anything else you want to share, Eric?
Oh, I could go all day if we want to share stuff, right? We could probably talk shop all day.
I did have one quick question. What's your favorite movement if you had to choose just one lift?
Just one lift? That's tough. If I had to, it's going to be a kind of a three-way tie of, if I had to go either some variation of a deadlift, right? Whether it's single leg is probably the one I program a lot more than just a bilateral deadlift. But if I'm going for the masses, I would say single leg deadlift. And then push up would be a close tie with that, because there's so much that can get involved if you do a really good quality push up. And then not far behind would be some type of carry would be in there as well, because I'm looking for stuff that are going to check a lot of boxes at once. So if you only give me one, I got to pick one that's going to cover a lot of ground. So I would probably go 1A, B, and C with those three.
Okay. No, and those are all unique. I wouldn't have guessed, right? I would have thought maybe a traditional big lift or something like that. So single leg deadlifts, you've inspired me to do more unilateral movements and isometrics now. And then you said push-ups and carries. So carries like farmer carries, we're saying, right?
There you could do overhead carry, farmer's carry, rack position carry, unilateral, bilateral, 6-position carries. There's so many different variations, but carries are going to get a lot of good things going in terms of posture, body awareness, grip strength, just general, you're getting core in there. You're getting a ton of stuff going in there that you would never realize until you've actually done a carry and realize how smoked you can be afterwards.
I like it. All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I do have one more question. Where can the listeners find you, learn more about your work?
Okay, easiest place is the hub is just my website. It's just my name, Eric Dagati, EricDagati.com. And on there I have, links to all those projects that I'm working on, as well as a Ask Eric button on there where you can just put in a question and it goes right to my email. Since platforms like this, we don't get a chance to interact with people. So someone may hear this and say, "Hey, I heard you talking about carries. Where should I start with that, or how do I pick my weight, or how long do I carry?" Those kind of things. Send those to me. And then as well as on my media page, I have all previous podcast appearances, all my social media links. I try to do my best. It's tough to keep up, but I try to do at least 1 or 2 posts a day with just some informational stuff to kind of pay it forward. We do clips from the podcast that we put up. So those are great ways to keep in touch and follow me.
And that's the Principles of Performance podcast, right?
Principles of Performance podcast. Yep. Yes, sir.
Okay. I think I missed that in the intro.
that's we're on YouTube and then all the different podcast platforms.
Make sure to download that. And I'm going to include all those links in the show notes. And Eric, thanks again for coming on the show. It was a lot of fun talking to you.
Awesome. Greatly appreciated.